What kind of trash is this? Victor Hale said those words in the backyard in front of 30 guests holding glasses of champagne. Warm yellow lights fell across the long table, the same table where I had wiped every plate and arranged every fork before the sun had even come up. I stood across from him, my hands still smelling like dish soap. In Victor's hand was the brown leather wallet I had spent 3 months saving for. $84. To Natalie, his biological daughter, that was barely the cost of one manicure. To me, it was weeks of washing dishes until my wrists went numb. Victor turned the wallet over in his hand, then laughed. It was the kind of laugh people use when they want to turn someone else into entertainment. 3 months of extra shifts, and this is all you could afford, he said louder this time, as if he wanted the entire yard to hear. A few people lowered their eyes. Diane adjusted her pearl necklace as if none of this had anything to do with her. Natalie stood beside her father's chair, her phone still pointed at me. If you have ever been humiliated in front of other people and still had to stand there as if you were the one in the wrong comment, number one, I was about to say that I had done my best. I was about to say the gift was not expensive, but it was the only thing in that house that had not been bought with Victor's money. But my throat closed up. Victor stood. The chair scraped against the stone floor with a sharp, cold sound. Then he stepped closer to me. "You ungrateful little thing," he said. Then his hand struck my face. The sound was short, dry, and so painful that the entire backyard fell silent. My head turned to the side. My left cheek burned. A glass of champagne slipped from someone's hand and shattered on the stone floor near my feet. No one came to me. Only Evelyn Price stood up. "Victor, you do not get to do that." Victor did not even look at her. "This is my family matter." I bent down, picked up the wallet, brushed the dust from the brown leather, and placed it back on the table. For the first time in 21 years, I did not apologize. I turned and walked into the house, then went down to the storage room beside the water heater, the place they called my bedroom. That night, I did not know that slap was not the end. It was the first door opening into 18 years of lies. My real name is Amelia Reed. But in that house for 18 years, they called me Grace Hale. That name was on my school papers, on my library card, and on the chore chart Diane taped to the front of the refrigerator. I used to think a name was just what other people called you. Only much later did I understand that when someone takes away your real name, they are not just changing a few letters on paper. They are changing the way you see yourself. Victor and Diane's house was in Henrico County, Virginia, in a neighborhood so quiet that even the sound of a car passing by felt unusual. From the outside, it looked like the perfect American home. The lawn was neatly cut. The porch was spotless. The big windows always had white curtains hanging in them. The neighbors often said Diane was lucky to have such a warm, loving family. I always wanted to ask them something. If a house has plenty of windows but the child inside is not allowed to look out, can it still be called a home? My room was in the basement, next to the water heater. But the truth was, it was not really a room. It was a storage space where a few cardboard boxes had been moved aside to make room for an old twin mattress. No window. No desk. No closet. In winter, the cold crept up from the concrete floor. In summer, the smell of hot metal and damp dust clung to my blanket and pillow like a second skin. Natalie lived upstairs. Her room had a large bed, a vanity mirror lined with lights, a closet full of dresses, and the flat-screen TV. Victor bought her for her 16th birthday. That same year, I received an old pair of Natalie's shoes. The soles were already worn down, but Diane told me I should be grateful because they could still be used. By the time I was 10, I was cooking dinner. At 12, I was doing laundry for the whole family. At 14, I walked almost an hour to a diner for part-time work, then came home and kept scrubbing the floors. Victor called it teaching responsibility. Diane called it paying them back. And back then I called it family. But when something is repeated long enough, you begin to hear the truth hiding behind it. Every time Diane said I was lucky to be adopted, I would look down at my cracked hands and wonder if this was luck, then what would misery look like? And the answer I was about to learn was far worse than I could have imagined. That morning, I woke up at 5, even before the alarm rang. Not because I was excited for Victor's birthday, but because my body had learned to fear being woken up by someone pounding on the door. Diane had left a 2-page list on the kitchen counter. Clean the backyard. Polish the crystal glasses. Iron the tablecloth. Slice the lemons evenly. Set out 32 chairs. Do not ruin his evening. I read the entire list, then started working while the rest of the house was still asleep. It was still dark outside. The cold clung to the tiles, but I knelt down and scrubbed every stain along the edge of the porch. By 7, my hands were red from the cleaning solution. By 9, my back was aching. By 11, Diane came down the stairs, her hair already curled, her nails painted pink, looking around like someone inspecting a hotel. "Don't let Victor see that you're tired," she said. "Today is his day." Natalie appeared close to noon, wearing a new blue dress, her highlighted hair shining in the sun. She placed a glossy white box on the table. Inside was a stainless steel Apple Watch. I knew the price because I had seen the ad at the diner. $700. Natalie bought it with Victor's secondary card, but when he opened it, he hugged her, as if she had sacrificed her entire life just to make him happy. "That's my girl," Victor said, kissing Natalie on the forehead. I stood behind the kitchen door holding a tray of food, watching through the narrow gap. In the pocket of my apron was my gift wrapped in brown paper, the edges slightly uneven because I had rewrapped it 3 times. For one foolish moment, I had imagined that maybe Victor would see the effort in it. But what hurt me was not that he liked Natalie's gift more. I was used to that. What hurt was hearing Diane whisper to one of the guests that I enjoyed helping that it was how adopted children showed gratitude. I stood there surrounded by the smell of grilled meat, wine, and floor cleaner, and suddenly realized I was not a guest at that party. I was not even a daughter in that house. I was the person preparing the stage so they could perform the role of a perfect family. And then came the gift opening. When I stepped out with the brown paper package in my hands, I had no idea that within minutes everything I had spent years trying to endure would shatter in front of 30 people. I went down to the basement without looking back. Behind me, the party stayed silent for a few seconds. Then the voices began again, softer than before, more forced than before, but still laughing and talking. That hurt more than the slap. One person can hit you once, but an entire room staying silent is what makes you understand just how alone you are. I closed the door to the storage room, leaned back against the wall, and touched my cheek. My skin burned under my fingertips. I did not cry. Not because I was strong, but because I had already cried too much in that place. Some rooms hold your tears for so long that one day you realize you have nothing left to let fall. I pulled my old backpack off the nail on the wall. It was frayed at the edges and had been with me since high school. I stuffed 2 shirts, a pair of jeans, a toothbrush, my phone charger, and the small shoebox hidden under my mattress into it. Inside the box were $340 in tips. I had saved 1 bill at a time. There was also an old envelope stamped by the Virginia Department of Social Services, something I had once pulled from a trash bag Victor threw outside 6 months earlier. I did not know what that envelope meant. I only knew that the name Grace Hale was on papers they had never wanted me to see. When I climbed the stairs, the music in the backyard had grown loud again. Victor was laughing. Natalie was showing someone her phone. Diane was standing near the glass door. She saw me pass through the living room with the backpack on my shoulder. For one moment our eyes met. I thought she would call my name. I thought just once she would ask where I was going. But Diane only reached out and pulled the curtain closed. I opened the front door and stepped outside. No one ran after me. No one stopped me. No one said. I still belonged there. The October wind brushed across my face, making the pain in my cheeks sting all over again. I walked along the dark road in Henrico County with no destination, no plan, and only one certainty in my heart. I would rather sleep outside with a real name I did not yet know than go back to that windowless room. And then after I had walked almost 2 miles, a black SUV pulled over by the side of the road ahead of me. The black SUV stopped about 10 steps away from me. In the darkness of the suburb, it did not look like a car that had come to save anyone. The windows were tinted. The headlights spilled across the road. The engine hummed softly. I stopped walking and tightened both hands around the straps of my backpack. One part of me wanted to run. The other part was too exhausted to keep running. The rear door opened. A man stepped out first. He looked to be in his 50s, tall and thin, wearing a dark gray coat. He did not look threatening. He did not seem rushed. But his hands trembled when he saw me. Behind him was a woman with reddish-brown hair, wearing a black coat and holding a leather folder against her chest. She stayed a little farther back, deliberately giving me space, so I would not feel surrounded. "I'm sorry for frightening you," the man said. "My name is Daniel Reed. I believe I am your biological father." I stepped back on instinct. "That's impossible," I said. "My biological parents didn't want me. They gave me away." Pain crossed his face, but he did not answer with anger. He simply reached into his coat pocket and took out an old photograph with worn corners. In the picture, a woman with light brown hair was holding a little girl. The woman had my eyes, my cheekbones, and a smile that tilted slightly to the left, exactly like the smile I had always tried to hide whenever I looked in the mirror. "Her name was Clara," Daniel said very softly. "Your mother. She died in a car accident when you were only 2 years old. And I have been looking for you for 18 years. If you are listening to this, and you have ever had a moment that made your entire life turn into a question comment, I understand." The woman with reddish-brown hair took half a step forward. "I'm Rebecca Sloan, Mr. Reed's attorney. We are not here to force you to go anywhere. We have been following the case through legal channels for the past few months. Tonight, when our people saw you leave the house with an injury on your face, we decided to approach you." I touched my cheek. The pain was still there, hot and more real than any words. Daniel looked at the bruise on my face. Something in his eyes seemed to break slowly. "Amelia," he said, as if that name had been sitting on his tongue for years. "I am so sorry I came too late." I did not trust him right away. But for the first time in my life, someone called me by a name that made my heart ache in a completely different way. Not because I had been insulted, but because somewhere inside me that name sounded like home. I sat in the back seat of the SUV with my backpack on my lap, both hands still gripping the fabric straps, as if the moment I let go, everything in front of me would disappear. Rebecca sat in the front seat and opened the file folder. Daniel sat far enough away that I did not feel trapped, but close enough for me to hear every shaky breath he took. He told me that my mother, Clara Reed, had died on I-64 one morning in March. A truck lost control and crossed the median. Clara died at the scene. Daniel had been in the passenger seat. He was badly injured and spent weeks in intensive care. When he woke up, the first thing he asked was where his daughter was. "They told me you had been placed in emergency care," he said. "I thought it was only temporary." But that temporary became 18 years. Daniel said he filed to bring me home as soon as he was physically able to sign paperwork. But the court told him he had voluntarily given up his parental rights. A social worker named Leonard Cross had submitted documents with Daniel's signature, stating that he was unfit to raise a child and had agreed for me to be adopted. Daniel looked down at his hands. When they said I had signed it, I could not even hold a pen. The air inside the car seemed to thicken. I looked at the man in front of me. I still did not know if I should believe him, but the pain in his voice did not sound like something a person could perform. It was not loud. It was tired and old, like a wound that had been reopened too many times and still had never healed. Rebecca showed me a copy of an old document. It had Daniel Reed's name on it, a date, a signature, and a court stamp. Everything looked completely legal. And maybe that was the most frightening part. A lie, if stamped enough times, can become a child's prison. We believe that signature was forged, Rebecca said. And we believe someone was paid to push the paperwork through the system. I looked out the window. Darkened houses drifted backward behind the glass. My entire life I had been taught that I had been abandoned, that no one had searched for me, that Victor and Diane had saved me from something worse. But what if Daniel was telling the truth? What if I had not been abandoned but stolen? I turned back to him. Then why did it take you until now to find me? Daniel swallowed hard. Because they changed your name. Because the records were sealed. Because every time I got close, someone covered it up. But I never stopped looking. For the first time that night, I no longer felt like I was only running away from a house. I felt like I was walking toward a truth big enough to bring it down. Rebecca took us to a small hotel near Broad Street. Not Daniel's house. Not a police station. Not anywhere that made me feel like I was being handed from one person to another. Just a clean room with a white bed, a lock on the door, and a window overlooking the parking lot. I stood in front of that window for a long time. It may sound strange, but after years of sleeping in a room with no windows, being able to see the sky from the place where I slept made me almost unsure what to do with that kind of freedom. Rebecca placed the file folder on the table. Daniel sat in the chair across from me, silent. He did not ask if I believed him. He did not force me to call him Dad. He did not make any grand promises. That silence confused me more than any words could have, because in Victor's house, silence was always the warning sign before anger. I opened my backpack and took out the old envelope stamped by the Virginia Department of Social Services. I found this 6 months ago, I said. Victor threw a box of my old things out by the curb. I picked it up before the garbage truck came. Rebecca took the envelope and opened it under the desk lamp. Inside was a yellowed copy of a document with lines I had never understood. The name Grace Hale was at the top of the page. Beneath it were numbers, months, years, and payment amounts. Rebecca read very slowly. Her face did not change much, but her eyes sharpened. This is an adoption assistance record, she said. The state was paying Victor and Diane a monthly amount to care for you. I looked at her. How much? About $810 a month. The room seemed to lose all sound. $810 a month. For 18 years. I thought about the old mattress they had picked up from the street. The winter coat Natalie no longer wanted passed down to me, only after she was done with it. The times my tooth hurt and Diane told me rinsing with salt water was enough. The extra shifts, the dinners I cooked, the floors I scrubbed, and Victor saying over and over that I was a burden on this family. If you have ever been called a burden by someone only to later realize they were the ones using you, comment. I understand now. I sat down on the edge of the bed, my hands turning cold. So all those years, I said, almost whispering, they were being paid to raise me. Rebecca nodded. Yes. But they made me work like a servant. They kept my personal documents from me. They said I owed them. Daniel turned his face toward the window. I saw his hand tighten until his knuckles turned white. In that moment, something inside me changed. It was not loud. It did not explode. It was simply the final piece falling into place. I was not a burden. I was the money they did not want to lose. And for the first time, I understood why Victor had never let me leave that house. That night, I could not sleep. I lay on the white hotel bed staring up at the ceiling, and listening to the steady hum of the air conditioner. Everything was too clean, too quiet, too different from the storage room beside the water heater. My body did not know how to relax. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Victor calling me ungrateful. Then Rebecca's voice echoed in my mind right after it. $810 a month. I used to think money was what that family hated spending on me. It turned out I was what they used to get money. But that was not even the part that made my blood run cold. 2 weeks before the birthday party, Victor had called me into his study. It was the one room I was never allowed to enter, unless he ordered me to. A large wooden desk. A brown leather chair. Bookshelves filled with hardcovers. I had never once seen him open. On the wall were framed awards from the church and photographs of Victor shaking hands with people from the local council. He sat behind the desk. In front of him was a thick stack of papers. "Sign it," he said, pushing the papers toward me. I looked down. The legal language was so long and tangled that after only a few lines my head started to blur. But one section had been marked with a yellow sticky note. It said that I voluntarily acknowledged I was not yet capable of living independently and agreed to let Victor continue managing all benefits, assistance, and documents related to me. Back then, I did not understand everything. But I understood enough to be afraid. "Why do I have to sign this?" I asked. Victor stared at me for a long time. It was not the look of an impatient father. It was the look of an owner realizing his property had started to think for itself. "Because without this family, you are nothing," he said. "No degree, no papers, no savings, nowhere to go. You think the world out there is waiting for you." I stayed silent. He leaned forward. "Sign it before my birthday. Consider it the most decent gift you could give me." Now, sitting in that hotel room, I finally understood that the gift he truly wanted was not the leather wallet. He wanted my signature. He wanted me to hand control of my own. Even after I was old enough to leave the system, he could still keep the money, the documents, and the benefits I had never even known existed. I had not signed. I had only told him I needed more time. And from that moment on, Victor no longer looked at me like an ungrateful child. He looked at me like a threat. The slap at the party was not because of a cheap wallet. It was punishment for the first time I had said no. The next morning, I woke up at 5, just like always. My heart was racing, my mind automatically running through the list of chores. Wipe down the kitchen. Wash the towels. Make Victor's coffee. Then I saw the white hotel curtains. I saw the window with pale gray light outside. And I remembered that I was not there anymore. Daniel knocked gently on the connecting door between our rooms. He placed 2 cups of coffee on the table, then sat in the chair farthest from the bed. "We can go do the DNA test today," he said. "Only if you want to." In Victor's house, every question I asked was treated like an insult. But here Daniel said, "If you want to," as if the choice truly belonged to me. "I need proof," I said. "Not a photograph. Not a story. If you are my father, science will say so." Daniel nodded immediately. "Exactly. You deserve proof." The testing lab was in a low brick building in Richmond. A technician swabbed the inside of my cheek. Then Daniels labeled each tube and sealed them in front of us. Rebecca stood beside us, watching every step of the process, as if every small detail could become a weapon in court. The results would take 3 to 5 days. Those 5 days felt longer than all the years I had endured in the Hale house. Because when you do not know the truth, you can still lie to yourself and say you are used to it. But when the truth is only one phone call away, every minute of waiting feels like standing in front of a locked door. During that time, Rebecca began gathering records. She contacted the Virginia Department of Social Services, requested copies of the adoption assistance payments, petitioned the court to reopen the old case file, and hired a handwriting expert. She also went to speak with Evelyn Price. I was not there for that meeting, but Rebecca later told me that Evelyn said only one sentence. I have been silent for too long. Not this time. Back at the house in Henrico, Victor began to panic. He called the police and reported me missing. When the police told him I was 21 years old and had the legal right to leave on my own, he changed his tone and claimed I was mentally unstable. But he had no medical records, no guardianship order, and nothing at all to prove it. Diane was texting him throughout the night. Rebecca later obtained those messages through a court order. One line made me read it over and over again. If the girl finds the real records, we are finished. On the fifth day, Rebecca's phone rang. She answered, stayed silent for a few seconds, then looked at me. The probability of paternity is 99.998%. I sat completely still. No one had abandoned me. I had been stolen. On the morning of the court hearing, Richmond was colder than I expected. I wore the navy blue blazer Rebecca had bought for me with a white shirt underneath my hair, tied low at the back of my neck. When I looked at myself in the hotel mirror, I no longer recognized the girl who had once lowered her head while carrying trays of food at Victor's birthday party. The person in the mirror was still afraid, but she was no longer small. Daniel stood in the hallway holding an old folder of photographs of my mother. He looked at me and said, very quietly, "Whatever happens, you are not alone anymore." Richmond Family Court was inside a red brick building with long hallways and floors that echoed with footsteps. Victor arrived 10 minutes after us. He wore a gray suit and a wine-red tie, his face still full of confidence. Diane walked beside him with her lips pressed tight. Natalie followed behind them, looking down at her phone, but this time she did not dare lift it to record. Victor saw me first. His eyes moved over my clothes, my straight posture, then stopped on Daniel and Rebecca. For one very short moment, I saw something slip from his face. It was the look of a man realizing for the first time that he did not control the room. When Judge Eleanor Whitman entered, everyone stood. Rebecca opened the file in a voice so calm, it was almost chilling. She said the adoption of Grace Hale, whose real name was Amelia Reed, had been built on a forged signature, a hidden case file, and a payment made to a social worker named Leonard Cross. The first piece of evidence was the DNA result, 99.998%. Daniel Reed was my biological father. The judge read it for a long time, then set the document down. The second piece of evidence was the handwriting report. The expert concluded that the signature on Daniel's form giving up his parental rights had not been written by Daniel himself. Every sentence Rebecca spoke fell into the courtroom like stone. Victor's attorney stood and argued that the adoption record had been recognized by the court many years ago and that a family should not be destroyed because of a few doubts. Rebecca turned toward him. "A family is not created by a forged signature, Your Honor. It is only concealed by one." Then she brought up the assistance records on the screen. Month after month, year after year, $810 had been deposited into Victor and Diane's account. Altogether, nearly $175,000. Rebecca looked at Victor. "Can you tell the court how that money was used to care for Amelia?" Victor sat up straight. "We fed her. We housed her. We gave her a roof over her head." Rebecca called the next witness. It was a social investigator named Marcus Bell. He read the report about the storage room beside the water heater, the old mattress, the fact that I had no personal documents, had not received medical care for years, and had been forced into excessive household labor since childhood. His voice was steady, but each detail cut through Victor's moral mask like a blade. Then Evelyn Price took the stand. She wore a gray wool coat. She said that for years she had seen me mowing the lawn, washing cars, and carrying trash bags, while Natalie sunbathed in the yard. She described the night Victor slapped me in front of 30 guests because my gift was not expensive enough. The courtroom became so quiet that I could hear the pen of a reporter behind me. Victor started to lose control. I raised her for 18 years, he said, his voice rising. Without me, she would be nothing. Judge Whitman struck the gavel. Esther. Hale, sit down. But he had already said enough. Everyone in that room had heard what I had heard my entire life. To Victor, I had never been a daughter. I was only something he believed he owned. I thought the hearing had reached its final stage. But then Diane stood up. No one had called her name. No one had asked her to testify. She simply rose from her seat, both hands gripping the edge of her handbag, her face pale as if she had just seen herself in a mirror that was too bright. Your Honor, Diane, said her voice trembling so badly, it nearly broke. I need to tell the truth. Victor snapped his head toward her. Sit down. For the first time in my life, I saw Diane refuse to obey him. She looked at Judge Eleanor Whitman, then lowered her eyes to the floor. I knew about the money, she said. I knew Victor paid Leonard Cross. He told me it was just a way to speed up the process, that the child had no one left who wanted her. I believed him, or maybe I chose to believe him, because adopting that little girl made us look like a good family. The entire courtroom went silent. Victor shot to his feet. She is lying. The judge struck the gavel hard. Esther. Hale, one more interruption, and I will have security remove you from this courtroom. Victor sat back down, but red patches had begun spreading across his face. The confidence he had walked in with was gone. The man in front of me was no longer the person who had once made an entire house hold its breath whenever he entered a room. He was only a man trying to hold wreckage together with his bare hands. Diane was still crying, but this time the tears were not like the ones she used to make people pity her. These were uglier, more real, and far too late. I saw him hit her, she continued. I saw that girl sleeping in a storage room. I saw her working like a servant. And I did nothing. I looked at her. A part of me had waited for those words for years. But when they finally came, I did not feel the relief. I thought I would. Some truths, when spoken too late, can no longer save anyone's childhood. They are only enough to place the final stone on the grave of a lie. The judge sat in silence for nearly 10 minutes, reviewing the file again. Those 10 minutes felt so long that I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. Daniel sat beside me, his hands clasped together. He did not touch me, but his presence felt like a warm wall behind my back. Finally, the judge looked up. Based on the DNA results, the handwriting analysis, the financial records, witness testimony, and the admission just made before this court, I find that the adoption of Grace Hale was carried out on a foundation of fraud. She removed her glasses. This court hereby vacates the adoption record. Your legal name is restored as Amelia Reed, effective immediately. I closed my eyes. Amelia Reed. That name was no longer a strange sound in Daniel's mouth. It was mine. It moved through the courtroom past every forged document, every dinner I had eaten standing in the kitchen every night. I had slept beside the water heater and came back to rest inside my chest. If you believe some people have to wait far too long before they are allowed to live under their real name, comment Amelia. The judge continued, ruling that Victor and Diane had to repay the full amount of assistance money they had misused. The file would also be sent to the prosecutor's office for investigation into document forgery, benefits fraud, and child neglect. When the gavel came down, Victor said nothing. He only sat there staring at me, as if he still could not understand how something he once controlled could stand up and walk out of his life. I stood. This time not to serve anyone, but to leave under my real name. 6 months after the hearing, I moved into a small apartment in Richmond. The first thing I chose was not the wall color or the furniture. I chose the windows. After 18 years of sleeping in a room where I could not see the sky, I needed morning light to remind me that I had truly escaped that place. I am studying for my GED now, and I have enrolled in a culinary program at Reynolds Community College. It may sound strange because Victor once forced me to cook as a duty, but now when I choose to stand in my own kitchen, the same action carries a completely different meaning. Some things used to be chains, but when they are placed back into the right hands, they can become freedom. Daniel and I have dinner together every Sunday night. He is not a great cook. The salmon is usually a little dry, and the garlic bread is usually a little burned, but he always sets the table for two, and he always asks me how my week has been. We still have many awkward silences between us. 18 stolen years cannot be repaired with a few dinners. But he is there. Consistently. Patiently. Without demanding that I be grateful for it. Victor and Diane are awaiting trial. Natalie has left the house in Henrico and started the first job of her life. I do not hope they suffer. I only hope the truth keeps doing its work. If this story reminds you of a room that once made you feel small, comment "I deserve better." My name is Amelia Reed. And for the first time in my life, when I hear someone say my name, I no longer feel like I am borrowing someone else's life.